पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज
Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you, wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat S. I'm an independent journalist based here in New York City, reporting on Pakistan, India, and the rest of South Asia. Usually my shows are in Urdu, but at least a couple of times a week, we try to expand our audiences as well as our base to cover all of South Asia. And as usual, with me is my wingman, Michael Kugelman, our very resident and very own South Asia Walla, a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, to talk to us through his Foreign Policy South Asia briefing. How are you, Mike? Welcome back to the show.
Very well, thanks. Good to be back with you, and I hope you're well as well.
Thank you. We missed our briefing last week because I had a quick an emergency trip, I would say an urgent trip, not an emergency, to Texas. That was fun. I had a lot of fun eating lots of barbecued meat and shooting guns. I felt like I was right back at home in Quetta, which is awesome. But back
is Texas barbecue better than Pakistani barbecue? I can't imagine.
Don't get me started, Mike. Don't get me started. You'll get me in trouble. But I must say, I don't really have beggars on choosers, as the Pakistani Prime Minister would say. I will take Texas barbecue at this point because Quetta is a far shot right now. But lots to discuss this week. The Pakistani Taliban have been found in Bangladesh, which is a critical story. They've been arrested there. We want to get to that. The actual Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, have now officially been recognized by the Russians, which is strange. Wasn't expecting that to come out of Moscow, but it has. The trade deals, which are ongoing all over the world, but especially in South Asia, we've been watching out for those. Almost announced, almost negotiated. The Bengalis have reached a trade deal, the Bangladeshis rather, the Pakistanis, the Indians are there as well. I'm hoping you can bring us up to speed on that. But I really want to start with this particular piece in your briefing. You're sort of bracing for impact for the PTI again. The PTI is trying to make a comeback, trying to get reorganized, more press conferences. One of their officials, Zulfi Bukhari, was in your neck of the woods speaking to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. In fact, he even tweeted a picture of himself at the White House, trying to stay abreast of the army chief's visit from a couple of weeks ago. You say that the PTI is ramping up, getting ready for protests. How do you see this moment in Washington from afar as the PTI is trying to reorganize?
Yeah, it's a high stakes moment for PTI, I think. It's been fairly quiet in Pakistan really since that protest in November that ended in violence. And as you know, they have these massive clampdowns on dissent in Pakistan, and that of course includes on the PTI. So it hasn't really been in a position to mobilize, and we haven't had large protests. And I think that the leadership is really struggling. I mean, this is a party that, so long as it's existed, it's revolved around Imran Khan. And, he's been in jail for almost 2 years. He continues to be very popular and influential from his jail cell. But I think that it's difficult, given the significant strain under which the party's surviving leadership is operating. It's very difficult to actually mobilize and be present. So that's why, this attempt to put something together to coincide with August 5th is so significant. If it succeeds, that could really suggest that this party really do have the capacity to do significant things. If it doesn't happen, or if they try to do it and it's put down by the state, then that I think would be an indication that the party's malaise inside Pakistan continues to be very present. And as you suggested, it's really been PTI and its supporters outside of Pakistan that have been making the noise and setting the narrative for the party. And I'm not sure if that's what the top PTI leadership wants. And one could even argue there might be some differences in views between PTI in Pakistan and PTI outside of Pakistan.
Mike Kugelman, you're really reading the tea leaves on this one. You're on the money, though. There are differences. I spotted them when I was in Texas. There was a group of people who from the PTI who wasn't being nice to a group of people also from the PTI. And in fact, we've seen that in the Tom Lantos Commission hearing. Zulfi Bukhari, who is sort of Imran's ambassador at large, based in the UK, but does make the rounds. He was, he didn't get the support he needed from PTI officials right here in the US. Now, I don't want to get into the he said, she said of it, but give me the big picture here from inside the Beltway. Will any of this matter in the longer run for the administration? I know you and I have gone back and forth over the last couple of years about what Imran Khan can or cannot offer to the Americans. And frankly, you can't offer much to anyone if you are in solitary confinement, which is what Khan is now. It's his 711th day today. But please tell me, with Bukhari tweeting pictures of himself at the White House or speaking to the Lantos Commission, forget the differences within them. Will this matter in the long run? Can America be, swayed from those 3 or 4 C's you and I talk about, which the Pakistani military is offering them? Crypto, counterterrorism, China, etc. I mean, what do Khan and his people have, or in Bukhari or anybody else, that the Pakistani military folks can't offer the Americans?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, the answer is not much. There's not much that PTI can offer in this regard. And so you're right. It was a significant thing that Bukhari was at this hearing before the Tom Lantos Commission, which is a very significant commission with some very influential U.S. Members of Congress presiding. That's important. And also, we didn't mention this. It appears that Khan's 2 sons will be coming to the U.S., to Washington next week, to try to advocate on behalf of their father. That could get some attention in Washington, just because it's that's a really special human interest story, right? I mean, the sons, the young, so they're not that young. Well, I'm old, so they seem young to me. They're in their 20s or so. They're coming to Washington. And I think that'll definitely get the attention of the Hill and maybe others. I'm not sure how many meetings they get with the administration. That's a big thing. It would be even a bigger thing if they can actually get into Pakistan and be present at a protest. That would get a lot of media attention, I think, around the world. But yeah, at the end of the day, I just don't see this as something that's going to move the needle forward when it comes to the U.S. or the administration taking note and being sympathetic to PTI and wanting to actually do something to try to advocate on behalf of Khan. Donald Trump just hosted a few weeks ago Asim Munir for a 2-hour lunch. Contrary to some media reportage, I have no reason to think that Khan was a big focus of discussion during that long conversation. So I just think that Trump's Washington is not the Trump's Washington that PTI supporters were hoping it would be.
I want to pick on that particular bit, which you just mentioned. Contrary to some media reporting, I think you might be referring to Dropside News, which just dropped a story same weekend I was in Texas about this meeting, this 2.5-hour lunch with the rack of lamb and jambalaya and goat cheese gatto and Imran Khan. But as Ryan Grimm claimed that Donald Trump said to Asim Munir that he should resolve the Imran Khan issue. Frankly, I was having a discussion with some PTI leaders on the sidelines of this conference I was at, and they were like, well, we've read the story, but it doesn't seem like Asim Munir is doing anything, and his Pakistani military is doing anything to really resolve the issue at all. If anything, Munir has gone back and cracked down even more, passed even more ordinances and laws, picked up even more people. Even today, the crackdown continues against Khan and his party. So are you in agreement with the Dropside Stories claims, or do you find them, like other PTI leaders, also don't really find them really well-founded? What do you think?
Well, I mean, again, even though it was a long lunch, which meant there was time to bring up all kinds of things, I just find it highly unlikely that Trump would bring up Imran Khan of all things. But your point, what you say, I think, is what's most important. Let's say that Trump did bring it up. Then there's still the issue of what comes from that. And I don't think the Drop News story was trying to make the claim that Trump was trying to push, that was trying to push Munir to actually fix the situation in a way that could actually work and be meaningful. But yeah, I mean, I think that the army chief wants to do things that Trump would like to see. But I think that there's red lines, and I think it's quite clear that the army chief has no intention of trying to, quote, resolve the situation. He might be willing to, give Khan that opportunity to go into exile and stay quiet, but that's not something that Khan would accept, right? Maybe that offer's already been made. I bet it has been previously. So yeah, you're right. Even if Khan was invoked, if his name was invoked briefly at the table, whether it was over the appetizer or the main course, or more likely, if at all, during the dessert, the coffee moment, I don't think that it's something that the army chief would have taken back to Pakistan, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I mean the proof's in the pudding, right? To really push the metaphor really forward. That there is no pudding, there is no proof. They're not being nice at all to the PTI. We've got even more bail cancellations. You've got even more delays in Khan's hearings. You've got even more attempts to confine him to solitary. So yeah, moving on, Mike, big story, perhaps the biggest diplomatic story in a while from Afghanistan. The Russians have become officially the first country on the planet to recognize the Afghan Taliban. I find this ironic. I come from Balochistan, which was affected by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan more than any other part of Pakistan. Perhaps KP is the closest, but my hometown of Quetta was destroyed. The social fabric was destroyed because of the influx of the Afghan refugees, the Mujahideen, who eventually became the Taliban, parts of them. So I find this ironic that 40-something years later, the same Red Army that blew Afghanistan apart is now recognizing remnants of that jihad today. Place me in this position. Why have the Russians, and not, I don't know, like the Central Asian state, or the Pakistanis for that matter, the Iranians or the Saudis, who were the last few countries to recognize the Taliban, why not them, as they did in the 90s? Why the Russians now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, I had thought that China would be the first to recognize the Taliban, just because China's been particularly active. They signed some deals with the Taliban. They want to bring BRI in, so it's a surprise. Look, I mean, I'm not a Russia expert, but my best guess is that it comes down to, first of all, the Russia's rivalry with the West and the U.S. wanting to, essentially blaze a new kind of trail that the West would not want to blaze, so to speak. And that's to basically disregard concerns about the Taliban, its connections to terrorists, its horrific policies toward women, and so on, and be different. So I think that's one factor. Another one, Russia is hurting economically because of its war in Ukraine, and I think it's looking for whatever opportunities it can get to bring some revenue. And maybe it thinks that by recognizing the Taliban, that could lead to some possibilities down the road for new types of connectivity, commercial arrangements, investments that might pay dividends for Russia. And then finally, Russia's really concerned, as everyone in the region is very concerned, about ISK, Islamic State Khorasan. And maybe Russia thinks that by having a formal relationship with the Taliban, it'll be easier to pursue formal levels of counterterrorism cooperation, such as intelligence sharing, that could make it easier for the Russians and the Taliban to work together, non-kinetically, but still work together to address what is a shared threat, the issue of ISK. I mean, Russia has long been concerned about how this group has been able to recruit a number of fighters from Central Asia. And then, of course, recently, Russia was hit, Moscow was hit by that horrific nightclub attack carried out by Islamic State Khorasan last year, I believe.
So when it comes to the other players, how do you think they're going to react now, the other stakeholders in the region, now that the Russians have taken the lead for the reasons you mentioned? What about the Chinese, the Pakistanis, the Iranians? What about the rest of the lot? Do you think they're going to now start moving towards this as well? Is this going to be a cascading effect?
I think there's a chance that Russia's friends, including the Chinese, would be willing to follow suit. China's foreign ministry very quickly responded very positively with a statement basically praising Russia for recognizing the Taliban. And some of these states in Central Asia and Russia's orbit and its sphere of influence, they could well follow through. China, Central Asia, they already have a lot of commercial things going with the Taliban, and the Afghanistan depends on a significant share of its electricity imports coming from the Central Asian states. So there's a lot to build on there for these countries. Pakistan, interestingly, unless I'm mistaken, has been fairly quiet. I don't think it's reacted publicly to Russia's decision. My view has been that if Pakistan can reach some type of agreement with the Taliban on the TTP issue, that maybe Pakistan will be prepared to extend recognition. But there's still a lot of tensions there. So I don't think that we're going to see Pakistan join any initial group that goes beyond Russia in recognizing the Taliban.
Yeah, I buy that. All right, let's quickly move on. Speaking of the Taliban, their cousins, the Pakistani Taliban, one of the biggest and most aggressive terrorist groups out there. They've been on the surge in Pakistan, but also they've been arrested now in a very unlikely part of South Asia, in Bangladesh. What's happening here? This is a story which it's in your under the radar section. I think that's very apt because I completely didn't see this story. This was reported in the Bangladeshi papers. But tell us about this. What are the Pakistani Taliban, mostly Pashtun by ethnicity, broadly? They have some Punjabi elements as well, which is, again, West-South Asian ethnic group. We don't really see Bengali militants in any capacity in either side of the Durand line. But what's this now? What's going on here with the TTP being arrested in Bangladesh?
Yeah, I mean, the historical context is interesting here. I mean, as you know, Bangladesh has this reputation for being a relatively moderate state, though it does have a historical precedent for jihadism. During the Soviet occupation, there's a fair number of Bangladeshis that went to fight alongside the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and then more recently, about 10 years ago. Actually, going back several decades, you started to have the emergence of some indigenous Islamist militant groups in Bangladesh. And then more recently, about a decade ago, you had a number of young people that were inspired by Islamic State. And you also had some groups like JMB. Again, these are local Bangladesh groups staging attacks. And the one that everyone outside of Bangladesh remembers is the attack on that bakery in a very affluent part of Dhaka. It was carried out by some young people who had been, in some cases, studying in the West, and they were inspired by Islamic State. But you're right, nothing to suggest any type of TTP penetration in Bangladesh. So the two guys that were arrested, according to the Bangladeshi press, they were not themselves TTP members. They were Bangladeshis who were arrested for their links to the TTP, alleged links, so they weren't specified. But what's interesting is that one of these guys gave in a confession in which he allegedly said that he went to Afghanistan via Pakistan, in fact, because of these links to the TTP. And what was also notable, and I mentioned this in the brief, is that, in this confession, it was stated that there's actually a significant number of Bangladeshis that are trying to essentially, I guess, help the TTP by recruit folks. Again, these are all allegations. So, I think we have to be careful about, looking at this as a definitive thing. But still, yeah, this is significant. You're absolutely right. TTP does not recruit beyond Pakistan and Afghanistan. But I guess perhaps this is a case, if these allegations are true, of sort of tapping into that historical precedent of, pockets of support for militancy. It certainly is very disturbing. But I mentioned this in the brief as well. The fact that Bangladesh made these arrests is interesting if you look at this against the backdrop of a Bangladesh relationship with Pakistan, which has made some pretty significant strides the last year. Was Pakistan working with Bangladesh? Did it share intelligence with Bangladesh to enable Bangladesh to make those arrests? Maybe so.
Yeah, that would be interesting if the Bangladeshis and the Pakistanis are coordinating on CT. We know they're getting cozy, but that'd be really, really cozy. All right, one more story, Mike. It's on your list, but this is something I'm a little confused about. Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister, Mr. India First, was in Beijing most of the week. Met all the top bosses of the Communist Party, including the man himself, met Xi Jinping, met his counterpart. He wasn't alone. Just recently, Ajit Doval, Rajnath Singh, India's National Security Advisor, Defense Minister, the top Indian apparatus has been in China recently. This is strange because of what China did via Pakistan to India, and then what the Indians are blaming the Chinese to have done via Pakistan to India. Effectively, just last week, the Indian deputy chief, the number 2 man in the Indian army, said that the Indians weren't just fighting the Pakistanis, but rather they were fighting the Turks and the Chinese. They were fighting 3 adversaries. The big claim, which Field Marshal Asim Munir twice challenged from the Indians. But again, this is not about the Pakistanis. This is really about the Indians cozying up or hedging against the Americans with China. What's happening there? This is a strange relationship. They're talking, but they're also blaming the Chinese. What's going on? What's the Indian strategy vis-a-vis China right now?
Yeah, so this recent series of high-level exchanges, where you had senior Indian officials in China, those were not bilateral visits. They were there as part of an SCO summit, initially a defense ministers summit where Doval was also present, and then a foreign ministers summit, which brought Jaishankar to China. But there had been bilateral exchanges as well. I mean, Modi met Xi late last year, and we have seen this warming pattern that goes back since there was a border deal in October of last year, which essentially entailed the 2 militaries beginning to patrol again in Ladakh. So it basically was meant to reduce the tensions that came out of the Ladakh crisis. And they've talked about resuming direct air flights. China has now let Hindu pilgrims come to Tibet to go to religious sites there. So, this has been happening for a while, but you're right. And I note this in the brief that even though Pakistan was using Chinese weaponry for the first time against Indian combat operations, this pattern of this warming pattern continues. And I think that it's because, India has a lot going on. It wants the border to be as calm as possible with China. I think it welcomes more space, more diplomatic space to allow for more economic cooperation. There's already a fair amount of trade between India and China, but I think India is keen to see that. But yeah, I mean, the point you made about hedging, I think, is really important. And this might be the biggest reason why India is still keen to want to be seen as wanting to engage with China and make things better, even after the Pakistan-China conflict. India is very concerned about the Trump administration, very concerned about what Trump and the administration is doing with Pakistan. And I think India wants to hedge against this unpredictability about Trump. And, Trump himself has talked about wanting to have a good relationship with China. He's spoken to Xi several times, and he said he wants to work with China to promote peace and stability. So I think that India is a bit confused about what's going on with, many of us are confused. It's hard to figure out what Trump is thinking. But I think that India feels that it needs to make sure that its relationship with China remains manageable in the face of all these uncertainties playing out in Washington.
That's an interesting one, because in a way, the Chinese are also well aware of India's precarious position. India's sheen has worn off in its global reputation. We've talked about that in the past. But also, this one story, by the way, which was not in your brief, and I must ask you about it because I'm sure you've heard of it, is the Indian top military brass's perspective. Just last week, Anil Chauhan, the Indian Chief of Defense Staff, sort of like raised a red flag after something we talked about a couple of weeks ago. The Bangladeshis, the Pakistanis, and the Chinese walk into a bar in Kunming, China, and all of a sudden there's news about a new SARC. This time underwritten by not anybody in South Asia, but rather Beijing. And I know you and I had a back and forth about it, but there was a flurry of commentary that, the Bangladeshis on the east and the Pakistanis on the west and the Chinese in the north, the Indians are being surrounded, and SARC is now going to be run between these 3 major new friends. I know that the Indian defense chief he had warnings about that. But all of a sudden, the Bangladeshis seem to be walking away from the crime scene saying, no bloc politics for us. We don't like blocs. Nothing like that is happening. But at the same time, the Indian commentariat is, quite concerned about a front with Pakistan, a front with China, which are real fronts, they exist, and now a possible front with the Bangladeshis, and the Bangladeshis have had to clarify this. What's your take on this? Was this the Indian commentariat being alarmist, or is there something more here that we're missing?
I think there's genuine concern in India about a multi-front threat, and I think that concern was sharpened after the India-Pakistan conflict. Again, you have this unprecedented case of Pakistan using Chinese weaponry against India, and India has been consistently concerned about the situation in Bangladesh since Sheikh Hasina's ouster. I mean, one can't emphasize enough how big a blow that was to India's strategic interest, just because, she was essentially India's closest friend in South Asia, and for many years. And so you have now a very different type of situation. So I think there's a tendency in New Delhi to assume the worst about Dhaka's intentions, even if Dhaka does not have the intention of forming some type of new entente with Pakistan and with China. And indeed, yeah, I mean, Dhaka has really distanced itself from that meeting. But India is going to assume the worst, and quite frankly, until there's an election in Bangladesh, which will happen sometime next year, and there's a new government in power, I think India is going to continue to be very, very concerned, and tend to perhaps get overly concerned about things it need not get concerned about. But the last thing it wants to see is China and Pakistan, breaking bread figuratively with Bangladesh, which has become India's newest, biggest concern in the region.
Yeah, no. Perhaps the Indians need to mend those fences as well. Maybe letting go of Sheikh Hasina might be a good step. Mike, real quickly, and I know this can be cumbersome, but the trade talks, the tariff talks, are all being negotiated right now. The Bangladeshis have just gotten their rate. The Pakistanis have gotten a rate that hasn't been announced. The Indians are on the verge of finalizing a deal. Run us through the economies of South Asia, and what does this really mean for the major economies, broadly speaking?
Well, I mean, the four countries in the region that were hit by the reciprocal tariffs all have significant trade relationships with the U.S. The U.S. is a top export destination for all of them, and that's particularly important for Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, which have vulnerable, fragile economies. And the U.S. being a top export destination for textiles and RMG exports, that's significant. So there's a lot at stake for these countries to work out a deal. It's interesting that that Dawn, I think we talked about this previously, Dawn came out with a story that there's basically an agreement or an understanding for an agreement between Pakistan and the U.S. Hasn't been announced yet. There will likely indeed be an agreement between India and the U.S. before August 1st. With Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, it's a bit more unclear. I mean, Bangladesh's government has been, very positive in its messaging. Sri Lanka's government has been very quiet. But Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, those are two governments that have particularly difficult economies right now. So they're in the soup. Some people have suggested this. Maybe we talked about this. It may be that President Trump wants to wait until he gets a deal with India and then announce the Indian and the Pakistani deals together. Which would have, just because that's the way he likes to do things. I don't know. And when Don said that there was an understanding for a deal between the U.S. and Pakistan, that doesn't necessarily mean a final deal, but it's something close. And, again, sort of gets to that issue of why didn't he just announce the deal sooner? He hasn't announced many deals, I should say. So it just may be part of his, his tactic of wanting to keep people guessing.
Yeah, that's if he does that, and I have a feeling he will do that, that's going to give the Indians yet another seizure about being hyphenated with Pakistan. But oh well, that is Trump for you. Mike Kugelman, my man, thank you for being a part of the show again. This is usually a weekend thing, but we decided to do this earlier because Mike's foreign policy magazine, South Asia Briefing, comes out every Wednesday. You can subscribe to it on the Foreign Policy website. The link is attached. You can follow Michael at Michael Kugelman on Twitter, X, and of course, he's just world famous. He's on Instagram. He's everywhere. He's the most popular analyst inside the Beltway you'll get from the think tank circuit in Pakistan. I'm glad he is a part of our show. Mike, with that, I hope to see you next week.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. I got to say, I only have 3 followers on Instagram, so that's my weak link. So it's interesting that you singled out Instagram, not the others, but
I was just being naughty. I was just being naughty. But you know me, Mike. You know me. All right, bud. Take it easy.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
That was Mike Kugelman from Washington, D.C. I'm Wajahat Khan. Share, like, subscribe, comment, support independent journalism, support independence. We really, really appreciate your patronage. I will talk to you very soon. Apna khayal rakhein. Pakistan Zindabad.